directly addressing her, and used French, making use of the plural vous, which is not the same note of coldness as the corresponding Russian form. At our last conversation, I notified you of my intention to communicate to you my decision in regard to the subject of that conversation. Having carefully considered everything, I'm writing now with the object of fulfilling that promise. My decision is as follows. Whatever your conduct may have been, I do not consider myself justified in breaking the ties in which we are bound by a higher power. The family cannot be broken up by a whim, a caprice, or even by the sin of one of the partners in the marriage, and our life must go on as it has in the past. This is essential for me, for you, and for our son. I'm fully convinced that you have repented, and do repent of what has called forth the present letter, and that you will cooperate with me in eradicating the cause of our estrangement and forgetting the past. In the contrary event, you can conjecture what awaits you and your son. All this I hope to discuss more in detail in a personal interview. As the summer season is drawing to a close, I would beg you to return to Petersburg as quickly as possible, not later than Tuesday. All necessary preparations shall be made for your arrival here. I beg you to note that I attach particular significance to compliance with this request. A. Karenin. P.S. I enclose the money which may be needed for your expenses. He read the letter through and felt pleased with it, and especially that he had remembered to enclose money. There was not a harsh word nor a reproach in it, nor was there undue indulgence. Most of all, it was a golden bridge for return. Folding the letter and smoothing it with a massive ivory knife, and putting it in an envelope with the money, he rang the bell with the gratification it always afforded him to use the well-arranged appointments of his writing table. Give this to the courier, to be delivered to Anna Arkadyevna tomorrow at the summer villa, he said, getting up. Certainly, Your Excellency. Tea to be served in the study? Alexey Alexandrovich ordered tea to be brought to the study, and playing with a massive paper knife, he moved to his armchair, near which there had been placed ready for him a lamp, and the French work on the Agubian tables that he had begun. Over the armchair there hung in a gold frame an oval portrait of Anna, a fine painting by a celebrated artist. Alexey Alexandrovich glanced at it. The unfathomable eyes gazed ironically and insolently at him. Insufferably insolent and challenging was the effect, in Alexey Alexandrovich's eyes, of the black lace about the head, admirably done by the painter, the black hair and handsome white hand, with one finger lifted, covered with rings. After looking at the portrait for a minute, Alexey Alexandrovich shuddered so that his lips quivered and uttered the sound and turned away. He made haste to sit down in his armchair and opened the book. He tried to read, but he couldn't revive the very vivid interest he had felt before in Yagubian inscriptions. He looked at the book and thought of something else. He thought not of his wife, but of a complication that had arisen in his official life, which at the time constituted the chief interest of it. He felt that he had penetrated more deeply than ever before into this intricate affair, and that he had originated a leading idea, he could say it without self-flattery, calculated to clear up the whole business, to strengthen him in his official career, to discomfit his enemies, and thereby to be of the greatest benefit to the government. As soon as the servant had set the tea and left the room, Alexey Alexandrovich got up and went to the writing table. Moving a portfolio of papers into the middle of the table, with a scarcely perceptible smile of self-satisfaction, he took a pencil from a rack and plunged into the perusal of a complex report relating to the present complication. The complication was of this nature. Alexey Alexandrovich's characteristic quality as a politician, that special individual qualification that every rising functionary possesses, the qualification that, with his unflagging ambition, his reserve, his honesty, and his self-confidence had made his career, was his contempt for red tape, his cutting down of correspondence, his direct contact, whenever possible, with the living fact, and his economy. It happened that the famous commission of the 2nd of June, had set on foot an inquiry into the irrigation of lands in the Zaraysky province, which fell under Alexei Alexandrovich's department, and was a glaring example of fruitless expenditure and red tape. Alexei Alexandrovich was aware of the truth of this. The irrigation of these lands in the Zaraysky province had been initiated by the predecessor of Alexei Alexandrovich's predecessor. And vast sums of money had actually been spent and were still being spent on this business, and utterly unproductively, and the whole business could obviously lead to nothing whatever. Alexei Alexandrovich had perceived this at once on entering office, and would have liked to lay hands on the Board of Irrigation. But at first, when he did not yet feel secure in his position, he knew it would affect too many interests and would be injudicious. Later on, he'd been engrossed in other questions and had simply forgotten the Board of Irrigation. It went on by itself, like all such boards, by the mere force of inertia. Many people gained their livelihood by the Board of Irrigation, especially one highly conscientious and musical family. All the daughters played stringed instruments, and Alexei Alexandrovich knew the family and had sponsored one of the elder daughters at her wedding. The raising of this question by a hostile department was, in Alexei Alexandrovich's opinion, a dishonorable proceeding, seeing that in every department there were things similar, and worse, which no one inquired into, for well-known reasons of official etiquette. However, now that the gauntlet had been thrown down, he had boldly picked it up and demanded the appointment of a special commission to investigate and verify the working of the Board of Irrigation of the lands in the Zaraysky province. But in compensation, he gave no quarter to the enemy either. He demanded the appointment of another special commission to inquire into the question of regulating the affairs of the native population. The question of regulating the affairs of the native population had been brought up incidentally in the commission of the 2nd of June, and had been pressed forward actively by Alexei Alexandrovich as one admitting of no delay on account of the deplorable condition of the natives. In the commission, this question had been a ground of contention between several departments. The department hostile to Alexei Alexandrovich proved that the condition of the natives was exceedingly flourishing, that the proposed reconstruction might be the ruin of their prosperity, and that if there was anything wrong, it arose mainly from the failure on the part of Alexei Alexandrovich's department to carry out the measures prescribed by law. Now, Alexei Alexandrovich intended to demand, first, that a new commission should be formed, which should be empowered to investigate the condition of the natives on the spot. Second, if it should turn out that the condition of the natives actually was such as it appeared to be from the official documents in the hands of the committee, that another new scientific commission should be appointed to investigate the deplorable condition of the natives from the 1. Political, 2. Administrative, 3. Economic, 4. Ethnographical, 5. Material, and 6. Religious points of view. Third, that evidence should be required from the rival department of the measures that had been taken during the last 10 years by that department for averting the disastrous conditions in which the natives were now placed. And fourth, and finally, that that department be asked to explain why it had, as appeared from the evidence before the committee, from number 17,015 and 18,308, from December the 5th, 1863, and June the 7th, 1864, acted in direct contravention of the intention of the law, Volume Act 18, and the footnote to Act 36. A flash of eagerness suffused the face of Alexei Alexandrovich as he rapidly wrote out a synopsis of these ideas for his own benefit. Having filled a sheet of paper, he got up, rang, and sent a note to the chief secretary of his department to look up certain necessary facts for him. Getting up and walking about the room, he glanced again at the portrait, frowned, and smiled contemptuously. After reading a little more of the book on Ugubium inscriptions and renewing his interest in it, Alexei Alexandrovich went to bed at 11 o'clock, and recollecting as he lay in bed the incident with his wife, he no longer saw it in such a gloomy light. Chapter 15. Though Anna had obstinately and with exasperation contradicted Vronsky when he told her her position was impossible and tried to convince her to tell everything to her husband, at the bottom of her heart she regarded her own position as false and dishonorable, and she longed with her whole soul to change it. On the way home from the races, she had told her husband the truth in a moment of excitement, and in spite of the agony she had suffered in doing so, she was glad of it. After her husband had left her, she told herself that she was glad, that now everything was out in the open, and at least there would be no more lying and deception. It seemed to her beyond doubt that her position was now made clear forever. It might be bad, this new position, but it would be clear. There would be no indefiniteness or falsehood about it. The pain she had caused herself and her husband in uttering those words would be rewarded now by everything being made clear, she thought. That evening she saw Vronsky, but she didn't tell him of what had passed between her and her husband, though, to make the position clear, it would have been necessary to tell him. When she awakened the next morning, the first thing that came to her mind was what she had said to her husband, and this seemed to her so awful that she couldn't conceive now how she could have brought herself to utter those strange, coarse words, and couldn't imagine what would come of it. But the words were spoken, and Alexey Alexandrovitch had gone away without saying anything. I saw Vronsky and didn't tell him. At the very instant he was going away, I wanted to call him back and tell him, but I changed my mind because it was strange that I hadn't told him the first minute. Why was it I wanted to tell him and didn't tell him? And in answer to this question, a burning blush of shame spread over her face. She knew what had kept her from it. She knew that she had been ashamed. Her position, which had seemed to her clear the night before, suddenly struck her now as not only not simple, but as absolutely hopeless. She felt terrified at the disgrace, of which she had not ever thought before. As soon as she thought of what her husband would do, the most terrible ideas came to her mind. She had a vision of being turned out of the house, of her shame being proclaimed to the whole world. She asked herself where she could go when she was turned out of the house, and she couldn't find an answer. When she thought of Vronsky, it seemed to her that he didn't love her, that he was already beginning to be tired of her, that she couldn't offer herself to him, and she felt bitter against him for it. It seemed to her that the words that she had spoken to her husband and had continually repeated in her imagination she had said to everyone, and everyone had heard them. She couldn't bring herself to look those of her own household in the face. She couldn't bring herself to call her maid, and still less go downstairs and see her son and his governess. The maid, who'd been listening at her door for a long while, came into her room of her own accord. Anna glanced inquiringly into her face and blushed with fear. The maid begged her pardon for coming in, saying that she thought the bell rang. She brought her clothes and a note. The note was from Betsy. Betsy reminded her that Liza Merkalova and Baroness Stoltz were coming to play croquet with her that morning, with their admirers Koluzhsky and old Stremov. "Come, if only as a study in mores. I shall expect you," she finished. Anna read the note and heaved a deep sigh. "Nothing. I need nothing," she said to Anushka, who was rearranging the bottles and brushes on the dressing table. "You can go. I'll dress at once and come down." "I need nothing." Anushka went out, but Anna didn't begin dressing, and sat in the same position, her head and hands hanging listlessly, and every now and then she shivered all over, seemed as though she would make some gesture, utter some word, and sank back into lifelessness again. She repeated continually, "My God, my God." But neither God nor my had any meaning to her. The idea of seeking help in her difficulty in religion was as remote from her as seeking help from Alexey Alexandrovitch himself, although she had never had any doubts of the faith in which she had been brought up. She knew that the support of religion was possible only upon condition of renouncing what made up for her the whole meaning of life. She was not simply miserable. She began to feel alarm at the new emotional condition, never experienced before, in which she found herself. She felt as though everything was beginning to be doubled in her soul, just as objects sometimes appear doubled to overtired eyes. She hardly knew at times what it was she feared and what she hoped for. Whether she feared or desired what had happened, or what was going to happen, and exactly what she longed for, she couldn't have said. "Oh, what am I doing?" she said to herself, feeling a sudden thrill of pain in both sides of her head. When she came to herself, she saw that she was holding her hair in both hands, each side of her temples, and pulling it. She jumped up and began walking about. "The coffee is ready, and Mamselle and Seryozha are waiting," said Annushka, coming back again and finding Anna in the same position. "Seryozha? What about Seryozha?" Anna asked with sudden eagerness, recollecting her son's existence for the first time that morning.